This is a Squiz podcast. We're your shortcut to being informed. G'day, I'm Kate Watson.
And I'm Claire Kimball.
In today's episode, it's gout, it's anti-Semitism in Australia, it's Syria, it's nuclear power, it's the murder of UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson.
It's a lot, and we finish on something pertinent to news publishers and news consumers.
Of which we and you listening are. Let's do it. The question we were asking ourselves on, I think it was Monday morning or Tuesday morning, was, is it gout or is it gwot? And there's a reason for that.
We did start the week, I think, with that very, very big question.
It was Sunday night. I just happened to turn on Channel 7 News, which I don't often do.
Yeah.
And they had a whole story about why it's not gout, it's gwot. So let's explain.
Yes. So we're talking, of course, about the 16-year-old athlete. He's from Queensland. He's the talk of the athletics world because last weekend he smashed Peter Norman's very long-standing Australian record in the 200 metres sprint. That happened at a schoolboys event last weekend. So maybe the question actually should be, how fast can this kid go?
I think we talked about that enough. I feel like the news has talked about that enough. He's really, really fast. It's very, very exciting when it comes to
Bolt
sport.
Has been, he beat Usain Bolt's time when
At the same
age. Extraordinary.
It is extraordinary. But what do we call him? Because his father revealed on the weekend that the family name was misspelt when it was translated from Arabic when he and his wife fled Sudan for Egypt. Years before their son was born in Australia, their surname should actually be Gwot.
Yeah, and spelt G-U-O-T.
Not G-O-U-T.
Not G-O-U-T. Not like the form of arthritis that causes very painful inflammation in the joints. Yeah. So another question, I guess, is what are we going to call him?
I think we don't have an answer for that. His dad said he's not really happy that he's called after a disease, that he's being referenced as a disease would be referenced. But whatever they call him, let them call him. His friends call him gout or Gigi, which might be where we land.
I quite like Gigi because it's like a horse that goes really fast.
As I said, we don't have an answer.
Yeah.
But that's the context. And regardless, it is incredibly exciting. If you haven't seen that race, he just absolutely smashed everybody.
Really cool.
Really, really cool. There's a lot of big news around this week, especially if you go state by state. So I just wanted to reference some of the things that we discussed talking about but aren't going to be talking about. So, for example, if you live in Victoria, it's all about Moira Deeming and her defamation win against opposition leader John Pesutto. Queensland and New South Wales, the announcement of a Papua New Guinea NRL team is huge. That's a really big deal. In the NT and SA, the assault on a baby in Alice Springs as well, all very big news items in their own right. But nationally, perhaps the most discussed news item this week was the conversation around anti-Semitism in Australia. So that's where we'll go.
Yeah, and that's after those acts of violence targeting Jewish people in Sydney and in Melbourne. We mentioned that arson attack last week. It was that attack on a synagogue in Melbourne's southeast. This week, anti-Israel graffiti in Sydney in the suburb of Woollahra, along with the burning of a car that happened overnight on Tuesday night. And locals said that was pretty scary because there were about 8 or 9 explosions that happened at the time. So they were quite scared about what was actually happening on the streets.
And for those who don't know where the areas of Sydney and Melbourne where these things took place, they are places with high Jewish populations. So there's a reason why we talk about Woollahra and Ripponlea when it comes to Melbourne and where that synagogue attack was. On Wednesday, Anthony Albanese, our Prime Minister, said those attacks were clearly anti-Semitic and completely abhorrent to who we are as Australians. He's been under a lot of pressure this week over that response, particularly to the synagogue arson attack, because he seems sort of hesitant to call it an act of terror last weekend. He also happened on Friday. He didn't really speak on it until Sunday. Come Monday, it was declared a terrorism investigation, police focusing on 3 suspects. On Tuesday, the Prime Minister toured the burned out ruins of the synagogue. That was really hectic.
It was really hectic. The crowd there was shouting at him. They'd formed quite a big crowd outside the synagogue. Things like, what are you doing for us? One person shouted, why is the Prime Minister such a coward? Another yelled, nice day for tennis. That's a dig at Albanese because on Saturday he was playing tennis in Cottesloe in Perth. Meanwhile, the congregation in Melbourne was preparing to hold a vigil for what happened there. There was a sense that perhaps he should have upped stumps in Perth and gone to Melbourne straight away to be there. As for the coalition, they were pretty critical of the way Albanese handled all of that. Peter Dutton said that Albanese's leadership was weak. This is the quote, it gives rise to further acts of anti-Semitism.
And to the point around anti-Semitism, there are numbers to support that. So the Executive Council of Australian Jewry recently reported that anti-Jewish incidents had risen by more than 300% over the past year.
Yeah, Jewish leaders around the country are saying things are really bad. As for what the federal government is actually doing about it, there was an announcement this week. So alongside the leaders of the Federal Police and also ASIO, Albanese announced Operation Avalite. It's a Commonwealth-led task force that will work with state and territory police. It's going to investigate threats of violence and hatred towards Australia's Jewish community and parliamentarians. That's an important thing to note.
So there's that. Also worth calling out this week is Gillian Siegel, who is Australia's first special envoy on anti-Semitism, told the Daily Telegraph she wanted to see the weekly pro-Palestine rallies moved from Sydney's CBD. They've been going on since October 7, labelling them intimidatory and harassing. It's no small thing to remove people's right to protest. So this was a big topic of debate.
Yeah, it was. Even if you don't agree with what people are protesting about, of course, we have a right to protest here in Australia. So lots of criticism about that move, not just from the pro-Palestinian camp, but more broadly. What's very clear, though, is that many in the Jewish community are feeling unsafe, and from an anti-Semitism perspective, it's the worst it's been in a really long time.
Yeah, lots of talk this week about increasing the police presence and so on. Another angle to this came up on Thursday night. Rupert Murdoch visited that synagogue in Melbourne that was firebombed. He was there with News Corp columnist and TV host Andrew Bolt. Following the visit, he told his company's newspaper, The Australian, that the attack was evil, that he was deeply moved by the visit to the synagogue. There's a reason we're calling this out.
Yeah, this is where we get to the coverage, I guess, of these issues. And it gets really quite interesting because when you look at The Australian, so that newspaper owned by Murdoch, of course, it's been going really hard at Albanese since the weekend. During the week, then a report in the Nine newspapers said that Albanese had told his colleagues that News Corp and the coalition were essentially working hand in glove.
And that it was an embedded part of the political dynamic. I'm sighing because honestly, this sort of makes me eye roll because this whole conversation is why people hate politicians and why they hate the media, isn't it?
It kind of is one of those ground zero examples, I think.
It is.
Yeah.
That's all in play as we head, of course, into an election year where certain newspapers are going to line up and who they're going to line up behind. On top of all that is the government's approach to Israel and the civilian toll in Gaza as well. So layer that on top and you can definitely see a very different perspective when you're looking across the news media landscape. There's too much else to talk about today, so we'll leave that there. And it's too easy of a segue to ignore. We need to cover off the Murdochs, I think.
Yeah, let's do that while we're here. Rupert lost his bid to amend the terms of the Irrevocable Family Trust, and the changes that they wanted would essentially hand his elder son Lachlan total control over the family empire. That would have been at the expense of his other children, so James, Elizabeth and Prudence. Their father wanted to change it because he believes that Lachlan is best placed to really lock in the company's right-wing editorial slant, which is essentially their commercial model these days.
For some of their publications and some of their most successful ones. Do you think this would make a good TV series?
I reckon you could put the pieces together. I'm thinking,
what an original idea.
Based in New York, lots of private jets and amazing homes.
I don't know.
I'd watch
I feel like it would be a success. I didn't even mean that. But we're referencing, obviously, Succession, the TV show. A lot of people saying that it's based on this family drama and this is the real life version of it. I guess where we're at now is it's an open question about what happens with those businesses, so Fox News, Wall Street Journal, after Rupert Murdoch dies. He is 93.
93. And yeah, what does happen is an open question. So James and Elizabeth aren't as conservative as Lachlan. That's been widely talked about. Prudence hasn't really been involved in the business much at all. Lachlan and Rupert said they're going to appeal that decision. So I reckon no one should really worry about whether the lawyers that are involved in this can put really good Christmas presents under their tree this year. They're going to do okay.
I think they'll just be working.
Sure.
That'll be how their Christmas wraps up, I think.
Yep.
Three other news stories that certainly caught our eye this week. We could have done a few more, as we said. I mentioned at the top there was a number that we thought about talking about. Also the childcare announcement. I would have loved to have got to that, but our job is to curate, Claire, and it didn't make the list.
It didn't make the list. I reckon we're going to have plenty of opportunities in the coming weeks and months to talk about government policy and spending and proposals and promises.
And what you need to decide on.
Absolutely right. Exactly right. Plenty of time for that. What we're going to talk about, though, of course, is the fall of the Assad regime in Syria. That's pretty notable, I think. As we all know, opposition forces took the capital of Damascus. That happened on Sunday. It's ended the family's 50-year reign. That was after a surprise offensive that reached the capital in just 12 days.
Yeah, we talked to this last week in Weekly Wrap. There's been a civil war there since 2011. That hadn't moved much for a while. 500,000 people killed in that time, more than half of those civilians. There was a lot of celebrating that Bashar al-Assad and his family's rule had come to an end. But there are so many lingering questions. The first is what happens next, of course, in Syria, because the rebels who stormed into Damascus have a complicated past and many are saying offer an unpredictable future. We know a little bit more than we did last week.
A little bit more. So there's a coalition of rebels that's formed. It's called the Military Operations Command. They're made out of Islamists and moderate factions. They're united, though, in their fight against the Assad regime, also their fight against Islamic State. That's happened over the last period of time as well, and also the Iran-backed militias. It's led by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. It's been in control of parts of Syria even up to this point.
Yeah, its leader and someone you'll hear talked about a bit in the news is Abu Muhammad al-Jilani. He's announced the group's split from al-Qaeda in 2016. He's trying to position himself, it seems, as a pragmatic statesman and his coalition as the right group to form a government with a council chosen by the people. What some experts say is a way to look at them is a bit like the Taliban in Afghanistan. So they're making a push to appear moderate, forgiving, forward-looking. At the same time, they've introduced Sharia law and don't give women or minorities many rights.
That certainly seems to be a bit of a blueprint as to how to look at this. Of course, it'll play out and we'll see how closely it mirrors that. The other question, of course, is what does the rest of the world think about all of this and how are they going to respond to this new coalition and potentially whatever sort of government might come out of this? The United States Secretary of State is Antony Blinken. He spoke this week about all of that. He said that the United States and the broader sort of Western world, including the United Nations, wants to see, and this is his quote, credible, inclusive and non-sectarian governance that meets international standards of transparency and accountability. I guess the important part in there is non-sectarian. We'll see.
I didn't realise that the US has a presence in Syria still in the north. Yeah.
It's been such a mess.
Yeah. I like just learning so much about that. The Daily by the New York Times did a great episode this week on the state of play if you want more. We'll move on though to nuclear power in Australia. It's back in the news. We knew it would come back.
Yep.
It's back.
It's back because Peter Dutton and the coalition promised that they would actually put their costings together and put them into the public sphere before Christmas. So we've got that now. The price tag is $331 billion. That's the capital cost. So the cost of building the reactors and infrastructure, there's 7 publicly owned nuclear plants that they want to see around the country. That number also includes the operating costs.
So much money.
It's not the sort of money you have down the back of the couch.
I know. They say they will deliver net zero emissions electricity by 2050. 331 billion was one number going. 400 billion was going around too, but that sort of seemed to settle about the 330 billion. So if you saw 400, that was sort of like the pre-announcement number. It's 331 billion. The other was 263 billion.
Yeah, so $263 billion. Dutton says that the coalition's nuclear power plan will cost $263 billion less than Labor's renewable rollout between now and 2050. So even when you look at what the Labor Party is doing, it's going to cost us many, many billions of dollars. He says, Peter Dutton says, it's going to mean, if we go down this nuclear route, cheaper electricity over the long term.
And also a cheaper deliverable. So the 263 billion, it'll be a cheaper thing to deliver. And then for consumers, he says, it'll be cheaper power.
Yep.
These are costings prepared by Frontier Economics. And just to the why on that, when you're in opposition, you don't have the Treasury or the Energy Department or the public service at all at your disposal to work through the numbers. So they get external people to do that. Of course, from here, those numbers will be prodded, poked, assessed, analysed, and widely criticised by the government, I would suggest.
I suggest that you're correct on that. And I quite like Michelle Grattan's take on it yesterday. She's a bit of a legend when it comes to Australian political reporting. She said, the release of the costings unleashes a tsunami of claims and counterclaims about numbers. The debate will be eye-glazing for many voters.
Yeah, or if you're a podcast listener, ear-glazing, if that's a thing. I mean, I already can see how that is the case. But the thing is, we do have to vote on it. It's such a huge point of difference for voters between the two parties as we head into an election. One for nuclear, gung-ho, this is how much it's going to cost. One very much anti-nuclear with a huge renewable focus. Anthony Albanese's government representative, Jason Clare, has called the coalition's announcement towards the end of the week a hoax bigger than Milli Vanilli.
You know who Milli Vanilli is.
I don't really get that. I know who he is, but why is he a hoax?
So Milli Vanilli was a hoax. Remember, they lip-synced their hits.
Oh, there was a whole documentary on them. Was that last year or this year?
Yeah. Anyway, we won't go down that rabbit hole.
Right.
Yeah, so the idea, they're just making it up and it's all smoke and mirrors and none of it's real.
They can't sing.
They can't sing. I don't know whether Peter Dutton can sing or not.
Actually, I have no idea.
No.
I suspect not.
I don't think we need to know that.
Let's not know. Final story in this section of the podcast, Luigi Mangione.
Yeah, let's get into that. Wasn't that a huge thing? Of course, he's the guy who's accused of killing the chief executive of an American health insurer, UnitedHealthcare. His name was Brian Thompson. He was shot and killed in Manhattan last week. He held one of the most powerful positions when it comes to healthcare in America. UnitedHealthcare is a really big business. Last year, just to give you a scale of it, it reported $281 billion in revenue.
Billions again. We'll talk about United a bit more in a sec, but staying on what happened, a 5-day search for the gunman followed. On Monday, the 26-year-old suspect, Luigi Mangione, was arrested in Pennsylvania after an employee at a McDonald's recognised him and called the police. It feels like it's dominated social media ever since.
It really has. And look, there's a huge level of disdain for healthcare, particularly insurers in the United States. People really, really hate these companies. Many have used this act to share their experiences of healthcare and insurance in the United States. Stories like having to wait 3 days in hospital for them to approve an ambulance, for example. There's one case, a woman to take her baby to have brain surgery, like really harrowing stuff.
Just heaps and heaps of stories being shared about that. To give some context, America's health system is very different from ours. There is a huge reliance on insurance to cover the costs of healthcare. There's always concerns about how much that's costing the public, always concerns about claims as well that are knocked back. And then on top of that, there's this commentary about a rising fan club for Mangione.
Yeah, and this is where I guess we get into the of its time, like how these stories can sort of go into a whole new sphere. The internet really has done that when it comes to this. So the New York Times wrote this week that he's a handsome guy. He's a young guy. They've really focused a good part of their reporting on some of these factors, like why has this been such a big story? Pictures of him have been everywhere, not just from sightings when they were trying to track him down during that manhunt, but also from his online life, because he's in his 20s. He's of that age where a lot of his life is absolutely on the internet.
Yeah, you can access that, although they have shut down his social media accounts now, I believe. That aside, it is the act of allegedly killing the head of a big health insurer that means he's been sort of elevated to folk hero status in the eyes of some, and that's what seems to be really concerning. With regard to UnitedHealthcare, specifically during Thomson's tenure as CEO, it was accused by lawmakers and regulators of systematically rejecting health claims. Mangione had a document conveying disgust with insurance executives on him when the police took him into custody. The shell casings from the crime had the words delay, deny and depose. That's notable because it's not dissimilar to the book titled Delay, Deny, Defend. That's a book about why insurance companies don't pay claims and what you can do about it. It could be a coincidence, maybe, maybe not. There's also been a little bit said about his health struggles.
Yeah, that he was personally suffering from a back injury, and what some reports say is that over the last 6 months or so, he'd pretty much cut off contact from his friends and from his family. Lots of speculation. We don't really know his motive. There's a lot to come about the details.
Doesn't have a criminal record.
Yeah.
It's kind of intriguing.
Ivy League educated, apparently very smart.
Valedictorian of his class, the whole thing.
Lots of friends saying he's a great guy, can't believe it's him, all of that, yeah.
Mangione is facing firearms charges in Pennsylvania, which is, as I said, where he was arrested. He's fighting an extradition order to face that murder charge in New York. Coming up, final week before Christmas. It's a mad rush to the end of the year. Well, for us. So, I mean, I just feel like it's not winding down.
It doesn't feel like it, does it?
Not at all.
I sort of got to a point at one part of the week and going, like, Christmas is next week. And it's like, no, there's one more week to go.
There's one more week. And it's
which is great because we do have a lot to do. But
I think we've got 4 podcasts to record and there's a lot. But I think for the government too, like I reckon political news will dominate the news cycle again next week.
Yeah.
The mid-year economic and fiscal outlook will be of note. That's MyEFO.
Yes.
That'll be released.
Yep, the phrase to clock is deteriorating outlook. There are predictions that we'll see 2024-25, so the current financial year that we're in, to be a bit better than they were expecting. But from 2025 onwards, so next financial year, through to the next sort of 3 or 4 years, that we'll be getting bigger deficits than was stated in the May budget. I was going to go big on this week, but I think we've already done quite a bit of news, and let's save this as a little gem that potentially we can get into some budget talk next week.
Maybe, if it's interesting enough.
See.
We'll see how we go. Moving on, Claire, the BBL starts. So goodbye to the TV for the next 5 weeks between 7 and 10 p.m. if you have cricket lovers in your life. That is what we'll be on.
Right.
I'm quite excited just to have something to put on and not have to like browse.
Yeah.
Try and find something to watch every
There
night.
is something quite peaceful about that, I think.
It's just like it's on.
Yeah.
It's like footy season. It's like it's on with something to watch.
You can engage, you can disengage for a bit. You can pick it up.
Yeah, probably just do a bit of scrolling. Also today, game 3 of 5 in the Test match series between Australia and India begins, playing at the Gabba in Brisbane.
So to recap, India won the first test. That was pretty
Easily.
epic.
Yeah.
It was not our finest test match ever. We won the second one though, so that was pretty cool. Hopefully we can make it 2 on the trot.
That'd be good. Sunday and Monday, it's the 10th anniversary of the Sydney Lint Cafe siege. That was when terrorist man Monis took 18 people hostage for 16 hours. 2 of those hostages were killed, Tori Johnson, the cafe's manager, and Katrina Dawson. The day is, of course, etched in so many people's minds.
I remember going to bed because I lived just across the harbour and could see the city. I remember going to bed that night thinking, I hope they're okay. When I wake up in the morning, it's all fine. And of course, it wasn't all fine. There will be lots of reflection on all of that. Also, remember the thousands of bunches of flowers that were laid down in Martin Place. Lots of vision, no doubt, that we'll get on that.
There's a few big anniversaries coming up because we've talked a lot about internally. Even next week there'll be a shortcut out on Cyclone Tracy.
Yep.
50 years since that happened.
Yeah.
And it's 20 years since the Boxing Day tsunami. And I watched actually the Ray Martin special over the weekend about that event and was reminded.
Because he was there, wasn't he?
He was there and he's gone back and he's done revisited people.
In Arche?
Yeah, yes. I didn't get to the end of it, so I don't know if he went anywhere else. But yes, that's where he
Yeah.
was. But yeah, I was just lots of those
Incredible.
big anniversaries coming up. So there's that. On Wednesday, former radio broadcaster Alan Jones will make his first court appearance. No doubt that will get a lot of attention. Something lighter, Claire. Friday, it's Ugly Christmas Sweater Day. Probably fairly irrelevant for Australians, I would say.
Not great for us. I'm not putting a sweater on.
No.
Or a jumper.
But I did.
as it
We
should
did
be.
discuss this in our production meeting, and I thought there should be a day for like ugly matching swimmers, because that seems to be the trend.
Particularly if you're on the beaches like you are. Matching pajamas. I know plenty of
That's a
families
thing.
who do that.
Yeah.
That's fun.
I don't do it.
Do you go big Christmas generally? Trees, decorations, the girls love it.
Yeah, I haven't
Yeah.
done the swimmers though, or the matching PJs. but,
Nice.
I
just put an extra bottle of champagne in the fridge. That's my Christmas decoration.
Oh, if only. I'm pregnant, Claire. I told you. Squiz recommends. I read a book that I highly recommend, Australian Gospel by Lech Blaine. It was recommended to me by someone we both know, Lachlan Harris. He raved about it
Yeah,
to
he
us.
did.
Some people listening will know who he is, and I can't stop thinking about it.
Really?
It's brilliant. Yeah,
He really rated it.
Yeah,
So, and
yeah.
you do too. Okay.
yeah, it's right down my alley. It's the true story, Lech Blaine's family story.
Yeah.
But written sort of like a novel. It's sort of written like fiction, but
Yeah.
it's true. And it's so Australian. It's such an interesting story.
Yeah,
I
right.
just love it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I borrow it? Are you done, or is it on your Kindle?
No, I actually bought it.
Okay.
So yes, you can.
Bring it in.
Absolutely.
I'll read that over the break.
Yeah.
If two people I trust like that say
Yeah.
it's amazing, then it's definitely amazing. So
yeah,
I'd love
to
read
know
that.
what people think, because
Okay.
it is really Aussie.
Mine's not as poignant as that. I bought a hat.
Yeah.
So
Why is that a thing?
because I think hats are hard.
Do you?
I do. I
Oh.
think a good hat is really hard, particularly if you're traveling a bit. Like you want a hat that you can actually sort of squash down a bit.
Oh, okay.
That has a nice form when you do pull it out. Deborah Hutton is someone that you and I met quite a while back now, but I've
squizzer.
always admired her a lot. She's got a collection of hats. It's called Canopy Bay. I've bought the Parsley Bay hat.
So
And
her whole thing is like being very, very sun protected.
she's out and about a lot. She did get melanoma.
Mm.
She's now hyper vigilant about all of that. These hats are like completely sunproof.
Yeah.
There's nothing getting through that sucker.
Okay. A book and a hat.
There you
It
go.
Sounds like
We're going to the beach.
I think we're going
it's
to the
Christmas
beach.
time.
Finally, you don't get off the hook that easily, Squizzers. It's getting serious again. We are going to talk to you before we go about the announcement from the federal government this week on I guess it's being called news incentives.
Yes. News bargaining incentive.
Yeah. And it's important to update you because we've been banging on about this all year.
I know.
Yeah.
It's kind of like finishing the year's story because we started with this in February. We're now in December. And of course, this is really sort of trying to resolve the question of getting social media companies and search companies to pay Australian publishers for news content on their sites.
Mm-hmm.
What the government has said is that they will put into place, they'll seek to legislate a regime where these big tech companies will need to either do deals directly with publishers or pay the government a sort of levy, and that levy would then be distributed by the government to publishers. Now, a lot of questions about how that's actually all going to work in practice. Lots of questions about when that might come in. So that's something to clock. The thing for us, I guess, is it's just to say conditions are really tough for Australian news publishers, particularly the smaller independents. That absolutely includes us. So if you want to do something for us, particularly for Christmas, and if you like the way that we do news, share us, follow us, tell all your friends about us. That would be great.
That would be great. I feel like this one is a bit of like we'd love to just tie it in a neat bow and say this is what's happening. But
Yeah.
the government made this announcement. And now it's, as you said to me, I was like, so what is happening? And you're like, it's going to consultation. We don't know. We don't actually know. So
and there's an election.
It's not resolved.
There'd probably be court appeals. Like, it's a big deal what they've announced.
It's a big deal. And I think the interesting thing from here will be seeing what Meta does, what Google does, and what ByteDance does, because they are the big tech platforms that are impacted by this. So we're just waiting and seeing what sort of moves they might make.
Yep. And we like to be practical. And if you like the way we do news and you want to see us around and you want to see us doing good and big things, tell your people about us.
Do you want to say it again?
Tell your people about us.
Have you got it?
Can I put this on some sort of ASMR kind of thing? Tell your people about us. Tell your people about us.
That's Weekly Wrap for this week. We'll catch you next week.